Fascinating, actually, is that whenever I've interviewed you or done your podcast, and I'm feeling it again now, I agree with so much of what you say, but that's not really the point. I believe that you come from a place of authenticity. And I think there are other people like that. Joe Rogan is another one that I watch him. Mm-hmm. I don't always agree with him, but I always feel he's authentic in a different way and to a lesser degree. But I think the point's the same. Someone like Andrew Tate, I can see why he resonates so much with young men in particular, because much of what he says, they feel fills a void in their lives where they feel oppressed as a group of people, and he gives them a sense of empowerment. So I get that. And it's interesting that I cite the three of you because Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California, and many think may end up being the Democrat nominee for the presidency next year, he said this. He said, I have a very serious conversation with my eldest daughter about the chat bots on Snapchat. I really worry about the misinformation, disinformation about what's happening with our country. But I really worry about these micro cults that my kids are in. I say micro cults because I don't know if there's a better way to describe it. My son is asking me about Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, and then immediately he's talking about Joe Rogan. And I'm like, here it is, the pathway. And when I read that, I sort of laughed because I thought, what pathway do you think that is?
That statement was unconsciously comical in 4 dimensions, which is pretty remarkable achievement as far as I'm concerned. I mean, first of all, anybody who talks about misinformation and disinformation, that the misinformation and disinformation that other people are spreading, is they immediately invalidate themselves as a serious observer in my viewpoint, because they're basically arbitrary censors. I mean, it's not as if we have some stellar and completely omniscient manner of distinguishing truth from falsehood, which is why we have free speech, so we can hash things out. And if people are foolish enough to believe that there's some straightforward way of identifying the purveyors of mis and disinformation, which is what the UN insists upon now, then they are in fact identifying themselves as the prime purveyors of such falsehood, I would say. Then the micro cult comment, that's just ridiculously funny, because if you are daft enough to think that Joe Rogan is a micro cult, you live in 1995. Yes. Joe Rogan is the most powerful journalist who's ever lived by an order of magnitude. And if you don't know that, you're just not in the modern world. And young people are in the modern world, and they know that Joe Rogan isn't a micro cult, and Gavin Newsom might not know that, but that just means that he's anachronistic enough to be deluded. So that's pretty damn funny. And then the next part that's funny is that maybe if Newsom had a clue, he'd be curious about why his own children are interested in these microcults, and exactly what it is about, let's say, Tate and Rogan and I that are grouped together, even though it's a strange grouping. I mean, I'm not particularly happy to be grouped with Andrew Tate, because I think that there's some elements about what he does that are quite reprehensible, but that we could certainly talk about that. And so, you know, there should be some curiosity on Newsom's front, trying to figure out why it is that this degree of popularity exists. And then the pathway comment is also extremely comical. I tweeted out after that, it's like, well, yeah, Gavin, you better be careful. We're coming for your children there, buddy. We're going to turn your girls into women and your boys into men. And I know that's a dreadful proposition, but, well, you know, it's just so preposterous. I don't know who he thinks he is in the most fundamental sense, and that's really something crucial since he's likely going to run for president.
Right.
And I don't know what world he thinks he lives in, but he certainly has virtually zero curiosity. You know, and I should point out as well, Piers, I have invited many Democrats onto my podcast. And one has agreed, and that's going to be broadcast soon. But for years I've worked, and I have very many contacts with Democrats, by the way. They're all terrified to come on my podcast. They won't talk to me. And so if it is a micro cult, at least half the reason for that is that the damn useful idiots on the progressive side, let's say, are too terrified of the woke mob to come out and actually have a conversation.